twilight lies gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the
Has recently posted a video calling back into a live show. We're reconnecting you now.
Bring in, as promised, Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker Michael Moore. Michael, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is Rachel Maddow. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Keith.
There's been a spike in the desire to own guns in Connecticut. Statewide, over 90,000 guns have been authorized for sale. You know how I feel about it.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Good evening, my fellow Patriots. Oh my goodness. I think we are under attack here at the Patriot headquarters of the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Norton. I do apologize for being a little bit late. That is the weirdest thing. We actually were ready to go. We hit the button, had no indication that anything was wrong. Did all our prelim tests, did everything. The minute we go live, the router, our router that hooks us, our Kodak, it's called a Kodak router, CODEC, shuts down. Have no idea. So we're on the phone with tech support, with Spreaker. That's who we connect to. They do a back trace, and our ports are being blocked. No joke. Seriously. The ports that connect to Spreaker are now being blocked. So, which is unusual because we have a dedicated T1 that runs here. Our service is a dedicated line. It's the same service that you would get from you would not get from but the same service that an ISP has. It's a T1. So we are now operating off of our backup circuit because for some reason our ports have been shut down on our Cisco router. Makes you think. This is a thing though. We're not just radio broadcast guys. We're actually technology guys. So we'll get to the bottom of this. But I do apologize. This is Jeff Norton, the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. You can join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com. So because we're about 30 minutes late and everything, we have a very special guest joining us here. Bob Savage. He's an author. He's an activist. He's actually written 2 books, Rendering on to Caesar, The Fair Tax, and also Shortening Our Leash on Politicians. He's also formed a 50c3 American Foundation for Furthering Ideas that rekindled the miracle of 1776. So what we're going to do is, forget all about the intros and everything that we normally do on the show. We're just going to kind of blow by that, and then we'll just kind of play it by ear. Hey, Bob, are you there?
I am, Jeff.
Oh,
sorry you've had a difficult time this evening.
You know what? It's all you. They don't want you on the show. They're afraid you. They're afraid you might have
could be. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, you have a novel concept that they maybe don't want people to hear about, because I can tell you, we spend a lot of time on this show talking about the problems and everything that's going on, and I have to tell you, both your books, and we have them actually on Amazon and everything, so we have links to them on our site. You'll be able to go to the products and books. But both of your books are actually geared towards solutions to what we're talking about. And, I don't know if 2 hours is going to give us enough time to talk about it, because there's so much information in these books, and I want the listeners to hear these suggestions that you have. But, the first one, let's talk about Rendering on to Caesar. I believe that was your first book, correct?
Yes, it was. It was the one that kind of got me started on this journey.
Sure. Now, what is the premise of Render on to Caesar? What's your premise behind that book?
Well, the premise is that we need a revised pricing plan for collecting taxes in this country. All in the world a tax system would be a pricing plan, and that I spent 30 years with a very large company, the Bell system, and 20 of those years I did pricing, and it got me started thinking that we just really seriously need to simplify our taxes. We need to make them make sense to people, given that this is what we pay for what the government provides for us. And we need to get it to a point where it's got some fairly decent economics in it, and it makes us want to do some of the right things instead of too frequently inciting us to do the wrong things. Yeah. Or giving breaks where we don't necessarily need them. I retired from the Bell system as a pricer in the early 90s, and I spent the first couple of years trying to write a paper defending and advocating for a thing called the fair tax, which back in those days was just getting started, wasn't well known, and I thought it was a good thing. I still think it's a good thing for the middle of the income stream. For those of us who are in the mid-income areas, something like the fair tax is a great thing. But the more I studied it and the more I wrote about it, the longer the paper became until it ultimately turned into a book. Because I concluded that as good as it was, it didn't address well at all people at the very lowest of incomes, and it also did not address very well at all people and businesses at the very highest end of the incomes, the very, very, very large, the 1%, if you would.
Yeah.
And so as I studied and wrote, I came up with this plan, and I added 2 components, ended up with 3. It's a very simple plan. Most of us, unless we're way, way, way up there in income or very, very large companies, most of us would never deal with but 2 of those components. And in fact, on one of the components, we wouldn't pay much at all because the credits we get for doing good things, putting a roof over our family's head, putting food on our family's table, providing medical insurance or making sure that the family's got medical insurance, got short-term insurance, got a retirement plan and that sort of thing. We would end up wiping out anything we owe under that component, and basically all we would pay is sales taxes. At the end of the year, we would have paid our taxes. The system can very easily work so that we've not only paid our federal taxes, but most of us will have also, at the same moment each time, paid our state taxes, paid our local county taxes, paid our city taxes, and most of us would be getting a rather nice refund on April the 15th of next year.
Sure. Now,
it has some other features in it that I think a lot of folks that listen to your kind of show would like. It requires the government to set a budget, something we've been pretty lax in doing the last few years. If they don't set a budget by September 1 of the year preceding the year we're going to talk about, then it'll be set for them at 95% of the budget this year. Not 95% of what the budget would be if we added inflation and things like that, but 95% of this year's actual budget. So there's some real incentives in there. It gets to be a simple deal for the people paying the taxes. Oddly enough, the government gets its money very quickly. Don't need any withholding taxes. We can eliminate income taxes. We can eliminate property taxes. We can eliminate estate taxes. We can eliminate, for all intents and purposes, corporate gains, and just on and on and on.
Sure.
Very simple plan.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that really struck me is that, I noticed that most patriots don't mind, most of our listeners, most of the people that we have conversations with understand that you have to pay some form of tax, be it for the military and to keep the general services up. I think what the frustration is that we're seeing more and more of our taxes not actually go for the services that to the citizenry. They go more towards, you hear it all the time, they're going to pay most of our income tax goes, if not all of it, goes to just service the debt, the interest on the debt payments that we have to make as a country because we're out of control spending. How would your tax plan actually address that concern?
Well, again, it's pretty straightforward. if the government has, let's take a government like the federal for the moment and just talk about it. The same would apply whether it was a state or a city or whatever. If they have debt or if they incur debt, then unlike today, they would have to set up reserves to back up that debt. And the amount they have to set aside for reserves would not be set by the politicians. So no more of this stuff of promising government employees wonderful, wonderful pension benefits and then not putting the money aside to make sure that when it comes time to pay those benefits, the money's there to do it. We would have reserve accounts, and they would be required just as much as the money that is required for the operating budgets every year. As we pay our taxes, the vast majority of the money would come in the form of sales taxes to a government. Most governments in the country, be they the locals, the states, or what have you, would, since we'd all be paying the same sales tax rate no matter where we are in the country, no matter what the size city we're in or the smallness of the village we live in or even out in the country somewhere, most of us would find that our governments were fully funded long before the end of the year. When that happens, all the excess at the end of the year, let's say I live in a smaller county here in Georgia, all of the excess at the end of the year would be divvied up so that half of it would go to prepay down some of the principal on any debt they have. The rest of it would then be prorated between all of us citizens in this county in the form of a refund next April 15th. Debt would be addressed by reserves. Debt would be addressed by this automatic pay down in addition to whatever they had to pay down out of the operating budgets for the year. And by the way, it would work the same way for the federal, if that's your question. So we would be addressing debt and those sorts of things just as much as we're addressing operating and maintenance budgets and capital budgets for a given year.
Sure. I mean, one of the things, the tax code. I mean, our tax code has gotten it. I think the tax code was the largest set of laws or regulations on the books, and now after Obamacare, we're up to about 11 million words. So I mean, I think that's got it well beat. But one of the things I noticed when I was looking at to rendering onto Caesar is that it's fairly simple. I mean, I think most people, there's nothing in there that's too complicated to the reader. It's common sense, kind of. The way that you laid it out is very, I didn't have a hard time understanding it versus trying to read the tax code.
I appreciate you saying it.
No,
Jeff, we don't have a tax system today. We've got a quagmire where the politicians can come at us in so many directions, in so many ways, and a lot of times we don't even know it. I mean, they can tweak an income tax, they can change a deduction, they can add a surtax, they can do something to capital gains, they can add 1% or 2% to a sales tax, And they can come at us in so many ways, or they can add something onto our cable bill, our telephone bill in the form of an excise tax or a franchise tax. We just have a quagmire that politicians just can feed off of. And we desperately need to do two things. We desperately, in my opinion, need to make it simple and make it understandable to those of us who pay the tax. We're the customers. And a good customer relation would include a good plan that a customer can understand why they're paying for what they're paying.
Sure. I mean, and that's the thing, is that I always use a term, security by confusion. When you do IT security and stuff, if that concept is if you always do things differently every chance you get, you actually inherently adopt a secure program. And I have actually think our government, through its reams and reams and reams of IRS regulations and stuff. I mean, there's several documentaries out there. You don't have to go far to watch the documentaries where even the IRS, senior IRS executives don't even know the regulations because they're so obscure. And I think, I actually think that is part of the design. Just inherently in the regs is that they make it so confusing that it's almost near impossible for everybody to follow it. And thus, it's typically you hear about the little guy who didn't count this inventory item in their small business that now has to pay an exorbitant amount of tax plus penalty and everything. And I think your plan, from what I'm reading, pretty much addresses that for small businesses as well. You have you propose a level playing field for individuals versus corporations, and no more of these loopholes.
Well, we haven't really touched on that yet, but the plan actually does several things in that regard. It does level the playing field. For example, between a very small startup company and a very large company. Years and years ago, my wife and I opened up a toy store in the Atlanta area. But before she did that, she'd been a teacher. And one of the things she considered as she decided she wanted to branch out on her own was a daycare. The problem was, when we found a good site for a daycare place, we looked up the street and there was the Y with their daycare. And they were a non-profit without nearly the tax burden that she would have incurred. We looked up the street in the other direction, and there was one of the local churches who also had a daycare. And all of their buildings and all of their facilities were essentially tax-free. She would have been at such a disadvantage. She would have been faced with such an unlevel playing field. There's another area that comes into play here. Huge corporations, often foreign corporations, transfer profits made in the United States that we expect should be taxed under today's arrangements, but they transfer them back to their home country and basically show little or no profit in their subsidiary over here, and then they get all the profit back in wherever, Japan, Korea, Brazil, or what have you, and we don't see it come in under our tax plan. My tax plan would largely eliminate that kind of thing. It would certainly cut it down grossly. Another area that the tax plan that I've offered here works, I think, to our advantage. If I'm a very large corporation and I'm going to have to pay some extra taxes because I've got a very high revenue stream coming in, I can cut that down by hiring more citizen employees. I can cut that down by using more domestic materials in the products I make or sell or what have you. In other words, I can do things that will help bring jobs back to the United States, or even create new jobs and new industries in the United States. And I'm doing it because the tax system that I proposed gives me the incentives to do just that. So that's an area, along with leveling the playing field and vastly reducing large companies, foreign companies transferring profits out of this country somewhere else. And yet it is a very simple plan to you and me. We see two components. They're very easy to deal with. They're very easy to understand. And one of them, just by putting food on the table or a roof over my family's head, I can virtually eliminate and probably totally eliminate. If I'm really poor, or even if I'm not poor, but the wife in the family is a very dedicated person who wants to put in some volunteer time, we'll even allow some credits which exceed that tax and create a refund, if you will. It just seems like it's something that we could get to and make this country a lot stronger as a result.
Sure.
It is not a plan that politicians are going to jump on for much the same reason that you just cited a minute ago. It takes away, or at least it'll appear to them, to take away a lot of the power that they get from having a very confusing quagmire.
Sure.
All the rules, all the regulations, all the exceptions, all the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages create a power source for them, and so in that regard, they're not going to be too excited about my plan.
Sure. Sure. And that was one of the things, too, is I just don't understand how a company, let's take Bank of America, makes billions of dollars a year, and you and I paid more in income tax under the current tax system. You and I have paid more income tax. If you paid a penny into the income tax, you have paid more income tax than a corporation who's worth billions and billions, who's made revenues of billions of dollars, paid last year. I mean, it's unbelievable, and that's how they manipulate or game the tax codes. And your book is roughly how many pages?
I'm sorry?
Your book.
Jeff, your voice is very very faint to me. I'm not sure I'm catching all of it.
Yeah, we're on
the question, sir?
Yeah, we're on the backup circuit, so it's going to be a little bit different sounding.
I got you.
So your manual. What I was saying is that a Bank of America or a large conglomerate corporation such as the bankings, who's made billions of dollars in revenues, they didn't pay any income tax under the current tax structure, under the current tax system, because they have departments and departments of accountants just to deal with the thousands of pages, if not several hundred books of regulations and IRS tax codes. Your book is roughly how many pages?
161.
161 pages.
And I think about 8 or 9 of those is an addendum, which is just a proposed constitutional amendment to put mine into effect.
Sure.
Written by someone who, by the way, is not a constitutional lawyer, but it would be pretty close to what the amendment ought to look like.
What it would look like. And that was, that's one of the things too. We were talking with IamAnAmerican.org, and they're huge on Article 5, doing a constitutional amendment through the state ratification, and what they're for is for a balanced budget approach as well. And like I said, your plan, like I read it, and it made complete sense. It made complete sense.
Well,
and,
thank you.
Yeah, and, I mean, you're talking.
I generally do need to throw one other thing in
Sure.
real quick, since the majority of the money that would be raised in the form of taxes comes from a sales tax. Many people kind of tend to panic at first when they hear that sales taxes might be much higher percentage than they are today. One of the things I do in the book, though, is walk through an example of our own toy store back in Atlanta years ago. If you came in and bought a $10 teddy bear from us back in those days, you paid us $10.70 because we had a 7% sales tax rate. I took the accountant's numbers after a couple of those years were done, and we'd filed our taxes and all that sort of thing. And I went back and took out all the taxes that our little business had paid or was responsible for. And I found I could have sold you that teddy bear for $8 instead of $10 if that business didn't have all those taxes. Furthermore, if the business that sold me the teddy bear or the business that manufactured the teddy bear and sold it to the fellow that sold it to me, and on, if all of them could do the same thing, we could have probably sold you that teddy bear for somewhere in the neighborhood of $5.
Sure.
Because there are so many taxes hidden already in that $10 price. If we had sold you that teddy bear under my plan at $6, we could have had a 75% sales tax rate. And do you know what the price would have been that you would have paid? $10.50, less than what you paid today. Now, I'm not saying that it will always be less, but people do tend to panic when you first talk about a high rate of a sales tax. But the fact is, prices would remain about the same, and in my opinion, would actually fairly quickly come down, because instead of a 50,000-page tax plan that the business has to deal with, it'd be a much simpler one. And eventually the businesses would be able to sell us things at much smaller prices, and at those much smaller prices, even a high sales tax rate would result in a price that's no more than what we pay today.
Well, and I
Interesting.
Think,
the other good thing about it is that you and I work for a paycheck.
Yes.
And we are so accustomed today to getting a paycheck, and we seldom look at the number at the top of the pay stub. We're accustomed to looking at the take-home down at the bottom, which is what we get to take home after all the deductions, including the taxes, have been made.
Yes.
Under my plan, there wouldn't be that many deductions. There wouldn't be any tax deductions, and you'd actually be looking at the number at the top of your pay stub, and that's what you'd be taking home.
Yes. It's amazing, going back to your last your statement about retail sales tax. My family, I actually live in, I don't know, I know that you're down south, and I don't know if your state has where you live, do you have an income tax, or you just have a high sales tax or a sales tax?
I'm sorry, I can't quite understand your question.
Where you live, where my family lives in Tennessee, in the great state of Tennessee, they actually don't have an income tax. They have a 10% sales tax, and they still, their economy compared to up here in Wisconsin, where we have state income tax plus the sales tax, and our sales tax is about 5.5%, and it depends on where you're at in the state of Wisconsin. because you got to pay an
Right.
extra tax for the stadiums and all that. But in Tennessee, they don't have an income tax. They have a high rate of sales tax, but yet their cost of living, when I go down there, gas is cheaper, food is cheaper. I don't think they pay sales tax on food or medicine. I believe that's excluded in the state of Tennessee. But they're consumable, and their economy is just going gangbusters. I mean, the town I grew up in, I think, started out with about 30,000, 40,000 people. Now it's one of the largest college towns in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and on top of that, it's one of the fastest growing. That area is one of the fastest growing. You have Nissans there. I mean, just a ton of manufacturing that's moving into there. So, yeah, I mean, I understand what your comment. I mean, I've seen it firsthand where people think high sales tax. Oh no, but no, it's actually the opposite. You actually see communities thrive with that without a state income tax as well. So
well, that what you say to me is a very good example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'll go a little step further here. In my plan, there are no sales taxes on food items that are basic foods: meat, potatoes, vegetables in the vegetable section, bread. The taxes would only be on the pre-prepared foods, the specialty items, the potato chips, the Cokes, and the things that are not basic. If you're building a house, the lumber and the cement blocks would not be taxable. If you're buying clothes, a man's suit would not be taxable. A man's tuxedo would be taxable. So things that are needed to just basically exist aren't going to be taxable under my plan. Only the things that are over and above. Food, for example, I mentioned the basic stuff at the food store, but if you go out to eat, then that's taxable. If you buy a hot dog at a ball game, that would have a tax on it, and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So, again, it's fairly simple. You walk into the store, and the store knows which items in its store are taxable and which are not. And so if you walk down the food store aisle, if you see a white tag, price tag on the shelf, that's a non-taxable item. If you see a green tag, that's a taxable, that they're going to add the tax to it when you get up to the cash register, that sort of thing. Again, it's simple for the consumer. It's simple for us, the taxpayer.
Yep.
And it's not that difficult on the business, by the way. They already know. You mentioned that in Tennessee, many of their food items are not taxable. Here in Georgia, most of our counties have a 7% sales tax rate. 4% of that belongs to the state. The other 3 are optional to the various counties. Most of them go for all 3. But when I go to buy certain basic foods at the supermarket, the 4% doesn't apply to some of the very basic foods, milk, fresh vegetables, bread, meat, and that sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, it just makes, and I got to tell our audience out there now. I will tell you that because we had that network glitch, we are getting our live listeners back. So, and I knew that would happen, is that once the word got out that we were live again and everything. So, I just want to let our listeners know, we are actually speaking with Bob Savage. And for those that we didn't get to do a formal interview because we tried to rush right into it because of the network glitch, but obviously Robert, you're from Georgia, you've been married more than 50 years. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you.
Congratulations. You know,
put up with me for quite a while.
That's it. That's it. And it's amazing. Sandy and I have known each other since sophomore in high school. I mean, so it's just amazing how, that things do last. Things do and can last. So we've known each other that long. We've known each other. Oh my gosh. So we're pushing about 30 years ourselves. So it's just amazing how that, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I can tell you that, high school sweetheart, and I would not change it for the world. But, so everybody knows, I mean, Bob, I'm going to go a little bit in your background because, like I said, we didn't have time to do that at the intro. It's amazing how you get all this scripted out and everything, and then you have the network glitch, and it kind of throws everything into the wind. But so people understand, like most of our guests here, very knowledgeable. So for those that don't know, Bob actually has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Alabama Polytechnic Institute. So you're Auburn, not Alabama, which is thank you.
Yeah, I tell people I graduated from Auburn University. They actually made it the Auburn University a few years after I graduated. So Technically, I graduated from Alabama Polytechnic Institute.
Well, but you're not Roll Tide though, right? So that's
I can manage pretty well. I actually grew up in Florida.
Okay.
So when I went to Auburn, the competition with the Tide wasn't quite as serious for me as it was for most of my classmates.
Sure.
I was more concerned about how we were going to do that year against the Gators.
Okay. See, I'm obviously University of Tennessee, so you guys put.
Well, we had some great games with Tennessee as well.
I know. It's just amazing. I remember, going to Neyland and watching some really good football back in the day. And so, I mean, they're obviously Alabama, is just a powerhouse in SEC, but. Oh, well, we won't talk about them. Let's not give them any more plug than they want. So, one of the things, too, is that people got to understand is, Bob, you actually, after getting your undergrad, you joined the Navy and you were part of the nuclear fleet. Is that correct, as an engineer?
Well, I was. I worked in Washington as a junior engineer on the design staff. I worked for a fellow that a lot of people that have been around a few extra years would remember. His name was Vice Admiral Hyman Rickover. And we were just beginning to, we were actually converting at the front end of the conversion of all of our submarines from diesel submarines to nuclear submarines. And I worked a little bit as a electrical engineer for a while. And then later as a project engineer trying to get shipyards ready to refuel these ships. We'd launch them about 4 a month back in the early 60s. And they had a 3-year life in their reactor core. So that meant they would be coming back for repair and refueling at the rate of 4 a month in a couple of years. And we had to get a bunch of shipyards ready to do that, because every other shipyard we had in this country had its hands full building new ones.
Gotcha.
So we had to get ready and do the repair jobs and the refueling jobs on the ones that would be coming back in a few years. It was a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. And after leaving and I just want to say thank you for your service, by the way. We make sure. Yeah, we appreciate everything, and and the fact that you put on this country's uniform and served us. We just want to say thank you, and it's just amazing. And I mean, we could probably do a whole story on Rickover. I mean, but we won't go there for tonight's purposes. So after
he was quite a fella, I'll tell you. This country owes him a huge debt. Well, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Not only for the service and the thing, but he actually created the safety. Most of our safety programs that are in the United States Navy, he can be attributed to him. I mean, that's why we have such we have a huge fleet And we probably have, as a modern Navy, we probably have more or less accidents than any other Navy out there. And a lot of that is because of, some of his safety. Like I said, we can spend, I actually studied him and, and just looked at some of his process improvements from an engineering standpoint, and the things that he implemented in that was just, at the time revolutionary, and still today still being used in modern process systems and manufacturing systems, especially regarding safety. Now, were you there when he implemented that? Obviously, I think you were, if you're there in the 60s, because he implemented I can't remember what they called it, but is any soldier that saw anything that was a safety violation can actually shut the manufacturing down instantly. Were you there when he implemented that program?
I was not there. I think I know the time you're talking about, and that occurred after I was there. I was there from 59 until 63, so the early 60s. But he was death on anything in a shipyard or on a ship that reeked of potential unsafe situations. Yeah. So it's not surprising to me that he implemented some very serious programs in that regard later on. He of course stayed at it a little while after I got out of the Navy, but sure. He was quite a fellow. I personally went into the Navy just despising the idea that I could not go to sea, that I was going to be stuck in a desk in Washington. And 4 years later, I actually considered staying at that desk. I did not, but he made a believer out of me.
Well, like I said, his process improvements and safety and all that stuff is still being taught in universities, to this day. I remember in a couple of the courses I took in college, he was mentioned quite a few times as examples, especially, in process improvement safety. So, but, so you had you had a distinguished career at 4 years, and then you get out, you get your master's degree, obviously from Rollins College in business administration. Back then they called it commercial sciences. But then you spent another, miraculous, 30 years with Southern Bell, which actually then became AT&T, right? No, it was Southern Bell, and then it became AT&T after the breakup, right? Or how did that work?
It has since returned to AT&T. When I worked for it, it was Southern Bell, and it was part of the Bell system. And I was real fortunate. I spent a lot of my time there in Florida during the Kennedy Space Center years. In fact, I was account manager to NASA in the Apollo Saturn years when we were just beginning to, the first time we sent men to the moon. I also, during that time, I spent some time with AT&T up at corporate headquarters in the New York and New Jersey area, doing some national pricing plans.
Sure.
And then came back to Southern Bell, which shortly thereafter became Bell South because the Bell system broke up, or was broken up. Of course, it has since evolved several more steps, and the old Bell South that I retired from is now part of AT&T, which is out in Texas.
Sure. So it's safe to say, I was reading your bio, and, I know we talked about it, a month or so ago when we first talked. It's safe to say that you're fairly an analytical guy. Your background seems to be analytical and by the numbers. Is that?
Well, I would say it's more in the area. I was very fortunate, particularly in my last several years with Bell South, to manage and supervise analysts whose job it was to help us figure out how to price our services, how much it costs to provide a particular service, whether it be a long-distance call, a line into somebody's house for just plain old telephone service, whether it be a dedicated line between two servers like the one you must be having some trouble with, among other things tonight, and things like that. And we did do a lot of analytics, whether it was in the pricing realm or whether it was figuring out what the costs were.
Sure.
Because obviously we didn't want to price something if we could help it below what it cost. We wouldn't stay in business very long if we did that.
Sure,
so,
sure.
Yeah, we did some analytics, but I tended to be more on the management side by those years.
Sure. Well, I mean, the reason why I bring it up is because, we have so many guests in here that make statements like, oh, we need to have a flat tax. That's the solution to the problem. And, and it sounds on the surface, it sounds, it's a lot better than what we're dealing with now in Washington. But one of the things I like about your solution is that you actually, from an analytical, you broke it down. You don't make a general statement, in the 160 pages of your book, rendering onto Caesar, the Ferris tax. One of the things I noticed or I picked up on pretty quick is that, there was thought that was put there. And I think it's important that our listeners know that you do come from an analytical precision type of background. These are not just words you threw into a book. You actually put thought behind them, and they actually, how do you say, one calculation or one of the calculations you do does flow into the other calculations, and they do affect each other. And you look at it from a total aspect instead of a certain part, which, by the way, I mean, you're talking to a guy who actually fought the IRS for 7 years, represented himself in federal court, and actually won. And so it took 7 years. I actually won the case, and it was because it was actually because of I took it. I won't tell you it was a national chain. I had them prepare my taxes, and I have some patents on certain technologies and stuff, and the way that they did the way that they did it. Now, the IRS's argument along the whole case was, well, you signed the form, so you agreed to them. And, my thing was as well, I signed the form because I was told that was, that was true and proper. And then upon doing the research, at a later date, I realized that wasn't correct. So I did, as a citizen, I filed my amended returns. And of course, it took 7 years of me fighting the IRS. And I finally got my money back from them after 7 years. And, so I mean, I'm fairly educated in certain aspects of the federal tax codes. And that's why I was reading yours and I was like, geez, this is so much easier than literally. I mean, when I wanted to read the tax codes, I actually went to the IRS office in Chicago and sat there for 2 to 3 days in their little study rooms and brought out their books, because they, you can't buy the tax codes, the actual tax codes, at a store unless you're, you can get them. That was the other thing too, is that a lot of people don't realize the tax codes that are currently being used against you, unless you're an attorney, it's almost near impossible, tax attorney, to get those. You can't write to the publishing office and get them. You have to be a lawyer or of that nature, or you have to go to a library and get them. But then the problem is with that, you don't even know if they're up to date. And that was some of the issues that we had, is that I would cite code, and then they would say, oh, that was amended back in this, under this, and stuff. But like I said, we won. I actually won the case. So it was like, wow, this is crazy. But, that's what I loved about your book, rendering onto Caesar.
Thank you.
No, it was simple.
I actually did have to do a little bit in that regard along the same kind of lines. We used to have rather large, what we call rate cases in the telephone business all over the country. And, of course, we had our share of them down here in Bell South. And I would have to testify to the commissions that were listening or judging just how well we deserved or didn't deserve what we were asking for. I would have to say to them, if you'll give us that extra $500 million next year in the state of North Carolina, here's the prices I'll have to change, and here's how much we'll get out of each change, and that sort of thing, and here's why we'll change it, and that sort of thing. And I actually testified in 4 states in over 35 rate cases. So you had lawyers coming at you on all sides, and if you argued for something to go up 2%, you had lawyers arguing that it ought to go down, then you had other lawyers arguing that it ought to go up 20%, and so we had to defend ourselves, and that was part of my job.
Sure. I mean, so yeah. I mean, it's just amazing. Like I said, I can't stress it. Any of our listeners, you can actually go out to our website, www.themidnightpatriot, click on products and then under books, and both of Robert's books are listed there. But actually, at the end of the show, when we actually post the show, we will also have links directly in the show posting, so you can actually order those. I just highly recommend.
Thank you.
I like I said, when I read them, it's amazing. Like I said, I get so many experts come on here and they talk about the flat tax, and I've been able to argue that the flat tax on its face sounds good, but there's issue here. It sounds good, but the problem is what do you do under this scenario? What do you do under that scenario? How do you deal with it? And it seems like, on the face, your book, you clearly explain how are you going to, take care of the less fortunate, of the people who, for reasons out of their control. And I'm not talking about those that typically game the system, but individuals who truly need social help or and everything like that. How do they benefit from your system? And you talk about that versus those that are the 1% as well, and the manufacturers. And that's one thing that I found amazing, is that you had a great balance between the two extremes. And the middle class, I wouldn't have a problem paying tax. And I think that's very important, because one of the questions or one of the statements that you make is, it's doing the right thing. And, we spend, I don't know how many hours we spend trying to get back our money, literally trying to get, I can tell you, I spent 7 years trying to get my money back out of this abyss called the IRS. That's 7 years. I probably could have went on and become a lawyer, a tax attorney or something. But, and your plan, it seems like your plan is geared towards doing the right thing. There's motivation to be, to do the right thing. And it's just, it's incredible.
We have some of that in our tax codes today. For example, I get a nice deduction for the mortgage that we have, which is incents me to put a roof over my family's head. Mm. But the problem is it's not always balanced very nicely up against the guy or the lady who doesn't have the income to have a mortgage, and so they have to rent. Well, they don't get a deduction that I'm aware of, or if they do, it's very hard to find. So in my plan, we both get the deduction.
Yeah.
And for what we pay to do the right thing, which in that case is put a roof over our family's head.
Sure.
Put insurance down for medical, whether we get it from our company or whether we have to do it on our own. We ought to be incented by the way the plan is structured, and that's what I tried to do. Now, we do have to be a little careful in some places and put some limits in there, because otherwise you get people gaming the system, whether they be taxpayers or politicians. So we've got some of that in there, but I tried not to make those too much of the plan. One of the gaming of the system that goes on today is what we typically call the underground economy. How many times have you been approached by somebody who's going to do something, landscape your house or work on your swimming pool or work on your driveway or what have you, and when it's all over and done with, they ask you to pay them in cash? Well, that may or may not be legitimate, but it certainly gives you the feeling that there's a pretty good chance that they are part of the underground economy.
Yes.
If they're a drug dealer, we don't want to countenance what they're doing, but when they buy food, they ought to pay part of the taxes along with us.
Sure. No, and I agree, and I think we're seeing more of that underground economy now more than ever. You know, when you have a workforce that's so displaced and, you have underemployment, not necessarily unemployment, you have underemployment, so you have individuals who are doing side jobs under that, and one of the issues that we were talking about with Obamacare, and a lot of people don't realize this, unlike the IRS, you would think that the IRS could go into your bank account and see that information. Well, actually, in order for the IRS, under the previous laws, but prior to Obamacare, the IRS to do that, they had to have reason, and they had to actually get a court. There had to be reasons behind it. They just couldn't look at your bank account. Now, under Obamacare, they can go and look at your account right now, and look at your cash deposits. They can look at anything they want to. Prior to that, like I said, the IRS had to give notice before doing it, and then but now with Obamacare, they can just do it. So, and I think our governments realize that we have an underemployment issue in the United States, or underemployed, and that's one of the things that a lot of people just don't realize with Obamacare, is that at any given time, I've even seen reports that they when you go into a doctor's office and you apply for the insurance company can actually look at your credit rating and see your ability to pay for services rendered, the premiums and all that, and they can make this decision. So it's what a mess. But yeah, I mean, I see it right. I mean, I've got friends who are unemployed or been unemployed for several years in the IT industry, and they're doing landscaping, they're doing all sorts of different odd jobs to make ends meet. And I don't fault them, because they got families, they got court ordered payments that they have to make for child support and all that stuff. So, and like I said, your system seems to take that criminalization out of that as well. So, excellent ideas. I mean, have you, after you've written a book, have you had any mainstream politicians contact you, or has anybody read it that you know of?
Well, I think it's beginning to get read a little bit.
Sure.
I spent a lot of time 2 years ago trying to convince my local representative to the House of Representatives up in Washington. I think he tried to stay with me a few times, but he was so caught up in all of the demands on his job and all of the other things. Plus, I'm not sure that as a politician, he saw any great advantage to him and the other politicians in it.
Yeah.
Then as it happened, last year, Georgia got an extra representative out of the census that was done in 2010, and I ended up living in a county that was a brand new district. So my old representative that I thought I had his ear on occasions, suddenly I was not too important to him because he knew very well that in this past election this time last year, I wasn't going to be voting for him because I was in that brand new district and he was not running for that job.
Sure.
So it's difficult to get the politicians. I am convinced that this is the kind of change, as are the kinds of changes in my other book, that we're not going to get done through Congress. We're not going to get done through the state houses and that sort of thing. Look how much trouble you had up in your state with a change about a year and a half ago that seemed to make an awful lot of sense, but it certainly flew in the face of a lot of people's feather beds.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
it just was not the kind of thing that you could get the politicians to work hard at. I think we're going to have to get these kind of changes done by the people.
Yeah,
the Constitution gives us two ways to get an amendment through. We have never in 200 and some odd years used but one of the two ways, and that was to go through Congress.
Yep.
The other way is where we're going to have to go, I'm convinced now, to get changes, real changes.
Yep.
We're not going to get real changes in terms of things like term limits, sunset rules on laws, tax reformation, those kinds of things through our politicians. We're going to have to get them done ourselves.
Well,
one of the things I'm trying to do with my website and the foundation is do more town halls and presentations.
Sure.
I guess this would kind of fall in that category, this conversation you and I are having tonight.
Sure.
But we've just got to get people to do more of them. I'm currently working with another fellow in trying to find a way to do town halls on subjects like these over the web. And I think we can do it. We're going to do some trials here before much longer and see if we can do those.
Well,
I'll go out and do a town hall in person.
Sure.
As offered on my website. If I can do that and a lot of other people can do it, if you can do it through shows like you've got, and we can get the people going, then we can get those changes going. If you stop and think about it, we are very much in the same situation that our founders were in 1776, and to a certain extent 12 years later in 1787 when they came up with the Constitution that they did. But in 1776, when they came up with the Declaration of Independence, they were faced with a king and a parliament who simply would not listen to them. And they had things they needed to get done. They probably had pretty short windows to do it in. And so they took it upon themselves and they did it on their own. They had an advantage we don't have today. They had a large ocean between them and that king and that parliament, and that gave them a little bit of margin and operating room on some of the things they had to deal with that were very tough. We don't necessarily have those today, but I think we've got to start having constitutional conventions where the people run it the politicians are kept out. We'll let the politicians have their say after we develop some proposed amendments or not, when everybody votes on them. And that's how we're going to get some of these things done.
Well, that was
a lot of folks will say that it is crazy to say that we could have a constitutional convention in this nation and keep the politicians and the party, the bigwigs of the two parties or three parties or whatever, however you want to look at it.
Well,
out and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well,
but if you look at our own Constitution, the one they created a little over 200 years ago, we do exactly that. The founders did exactly that sort of thing with the Electoral College. They said, when they set up the electoral colleges, they said, those colleges will be held in the states, not in Washington. They will be held by people who are not in office or officials, bureaucrats, whatever you want to call them, party bigwigs. And so that's the kind of model I think we're going to have to follow if we're going to do it in our time.
Well, I don't know.
We're looking really, to me, at the same kind of situation that the founders did in the late 1700s.
Yeah, let me kind of add. I just want to add. I know that we talked and stuff. We actually had a group on here called IamAmerican.org, and Typhoon Lou, very well connected within the Tea Party movement and the GOP as far as that. And I'm definitely going to put your books into his hands, because the whole premise of the IamAmerican.org is that they are actually, right now we have 10 states. You need 36 to do a constitutional convention. They have 10 states already committed. It looks like we're going to be adding a few more states here in the next couple of months. There is a great possibility, to your point, if you go to the Congress, you're never going to get an amendment like this passed. And you're going to have to do an Article 5. There's no doubt about it. So definitely, I'm definitely going to introduce you to Lou, because they have the movement. They already have 10 states already committed, and like I said, they have several more coming on board in the next couple of months. And it looks like
we have to have 34 states request a convention.
Yes.
And if I read the Constitution correctly, Congress has
zero
option. Now, I'm sure they'll try to find ways, but they have no option but to allow us to have a convention.
Sure.
After we do a convention, if we come out of that convention with a proposed amendment, 10 proposed amendments, one proposed amendment with 10 different sections in it, doesn't matter what. If we come out of that, then those get put before all the states, and if we can get 38 states to approve, then we've got a constitutional amendment, whether Congress or the President or the Supreme Court likes it or not.
Yeah, well,
I will say this. In my second book, which we haven't talked about much this evening, I actually have an addendum which walks us through. It's very simplified. I'm not trying to say that it crosses all the T's and dots all the I's, but in a very simplified fashion, it walks us through what we would have to do to get 34 states to ask Congress and then 38 states to approve it. And it does it, like I say, it's probably overly simplistic, but what I was trying to do here was get a lot of people to get a very clear general understanding of just what it would take to go through that process.
Sure.
But that's in my second book.
Well,
it's
actually,
an addendum.
Yep. Let's do this.
In the book called Shortening the Leash, Our Leash on Politicians.
Yep. So.
And I think it gives us at least a template for walking through just how that would be done. Incidentally, I had a little bit of some heartburn about 2 months ago when my book was released, because about 2 weeks before my book was released, another fellow released a book, and he has a much bigger following and a much better known name.
Yes.
And that sort of thing, and he released a book very much along the same lines, and he's got all my ideas. He'd probably say I have all his ideas, but we're in perfect agreement.
Yes.
That the only way we're going to get these kinds of things done in this country and get our country back is to start holding constitutional conventions. I think the founders fully expected that we would have done this at least every 50 years anyway, and we have not.
Yeah.
We probably failed them in that regard, but we can pick up the tools now and get started.
Well,
I don't think it's too late.
Let's do this, Bob. Let's take we've already been talking almost an hour, so let's take a break, and this is a great time, kind of get some water and everything. Let's take a break, and then when we get back, what we'll do is we will talk about your second book. Do you have more time to give us? And I do apologize for that. Okay, so let's take about
no problem.
Yeah, let's take about a 5 minute break. Let's pay some bills here, and then we'll come back, and we're speaking with Bob Savage. We just completed, talking and discussing his book, Give Unto Caesar, or Rendering Unto Caesar, and I highly recommend you guys can go out to the web. You go out to our webpage, www.themidnightpatriot. There's links to it. Under the product section, there will be a better banner link after the show. Get that book. You guys got to read it. It's great insightfulness. What I'm honestly hoping is that we do the Article 5 and we get it that way. The other way is that when a politician, and I know I have some presidential candidates that are listening. I know that I have a couple senators that are listening to the show or listen to our show. When they're running and you always hear, well, what's your plan? What's your plan going to be if you want to redo this the tax thing? I would love, and I'm sure, Bob, you would love it too, if they pulled out your book and handed it to them and say, here's my plan. And because it just makes sense. So we're, like I said, we're going to take a small break. When we get back, then we're going to go on to Bob's second book, Shortening Our Leash on Politicians. You're listening to the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. You can join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com. You can actually Skype us a little bit later. We'll open up the Skype lines at The Midnight Patriot, and we'll be back in a few minutes and finish up the conversation with Bob.
In a moment, cancer changed our lives forever.
We were told nothing could be done to enjoy these final moments together.
But in that moment, when all seemed lost,
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital gave us hope.
Because at this moment, St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is saving lives with pioneering research and care. We're changing the way the world treats childhood cancer by sharing our discoveries with doctors and scientists everywhere.
And we'll never have to pay St. Jude for anything, ever.
At this moment, she wants to be in her own bed.
I want to be back at school with my friends.
I want to be outside playing.
Please take a moment and join St. Jude in finding cures and saving.
Oh, that? It's my time machine.
Does it work?
Sure. Just hit this button.
Whoa, dinosaurs. Cool.
Or we can go here.
Hey, that's Napoleon.
Oui.
Or we can go to the future.
Wow, hey, you have this nice house. Do I have a nice house?
No, you didn't save any money. Always spent it on vacations and stuff.
If only there was a way I could go back in time and correct that bad habit.
Yep.
Okay, the time machine is not real, but the saving thing is. Get in the habit of putting some of your money in savings each week through a 401k, savings account, or financial investments. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free ideas and easy tips on saving, go to feedthepig.org. That's feedthepig.org.
What does this crazy little button do?
Wait, no!
This message brought to you by the American...
You're listening to the Midnight Patriot radio show and podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Norton. And for those that are just joining us, I do see a lot of you guys coming back onto the show. I do have to apologize for about the first 30 minutes of the show. We had a network outage. And during the break, I was actually reading the emails. And it clearly, without getting too technical and stuff, we, obviously we're on our backup network line. We have multiple lines. We kind of take the approach that Prepper Recon has taught us to be prepared. Our old Boy Scout motto is there too. And so we're on our backup circuit, getting to the network and everything, and we will investigate and kind of let our audience know what's going on. So I do apologize for the first 30 minutes and everything, but these things happen, and we just have to move on. That's the way it should be. So on the line, we actually have author Robert Savage, Bob, it goes by Bob. And so we just completed talking about his first book, Rendering on to Caesar. Now, great segue and everything, Bob. Shortening our leash on politicians. Man, would I love to shorten that leash. I actually think they shouldn't even be allowed to go to Washington. They need to stay in their states. And they need to, deal with the wrath of their citizenry that they're supposedly represent. They can't escape to that fantasy land called Washington, D.C. anymore. So now this book here just came out, correct?
Yes, it was. The official release date was in September. That's when the publisher turned it loose on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and
sure.
And so. But it's been out about a month and a half now, and I've had copies locally and been talking about it down here in my area a little bit. I teach both of the books at Clemson University, and also I've taught Rendering unto Caesar over at the University of Georgia in what's called the lifelong learning institutes that they have, which is
sure.
a real good way to get to talk to a lot of people who want to keep their learning skills up even after retirement and things like that.
Sure.
I've taught it and I've done some book signings and that sort of thing, but I'm beginning to get it out on some radio cast and podcasts and that sort of thing, but the actual release was in September, and I'm looking forward to having some fun with it.
Oh,
we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
I think the tie-in in that regard is that the two books really go together, and because there are parts of the first book that I refer to and utilize in the second book. So sometimes you have to go back and read the first book in order to learn what a panel of experts might be. But
yes.
The second book, Shortening Our Leash, does have an addendum. I think it's addendum 3 toward the back of the book, where I, in a very simplistic way, walk through what I believe we would have to do in the states, each of us would have to do in our own states, in order to get a convention going where we could then consider the items that I've suggested, and others. I'm sure there are other good ones out there. Or there are people who would take the items I've suggested and tweak them a little bit and probably make them better. But we could have those conventions. We could come out with proposed amendments. And then if we could get 38 states, either the legislatures or the citizens in 38 states, we'd have it done.
Yep. Well, I mean, that was the thing is, you know, you referred to, and for those that don't know, you know, Mark Levin came out with his book, and it's amazing because, you know, when Mark, you know, with your book and then Mark's book, you guys, you know, I think there's a reason. I think America is looking for, you know, a change there in Washington, and I think, you know, the fact that you guys both publish your books at the same time and relatively have the same amount of ideas or the same type of ideas in it is not coincidental. You know, it's not coincidental. It's actually, I think, you know, I just want to say that I think that there's some kind of force greater than ourselves pushing these ideas. You know, we pray every day, God help us with our country. What can we do? And everything. How did you come up with your ideas? You know, is it just something out of reading, or was it just that, you know, God, give me, give me something. I need something, and then all of a sudden, because, well, you know, that's what happens here a lot of times.
I'd like to say some of that's in there, but the way I approached it was to. I wrote the first book about taxes because that's what caused the first convention where the Constitution was produced. They had to come up with taxing power, and so they had this convention, and they had 12 of the 13 states sent delegates to Philadelphia, and in 1787, and that's how they did it. But after I wrote that, I got to thinking and reading about that convention, and I realized that if you consider just how far apart in many, many ideas the delegates from those 12 states were, just imagine the difference in thinking between a John Adams from Massachusetts and his feeling, for example, about slavery. Compare that with Button Gwinnett or Charles Pinckney from South Carolina or Georgia. Button was from Georgia. And their feelings, and if you just think how far apart they were on so many basic items, and yet they managed to come to agreement. Well, that took statesmanship. And we can very well recognize what statesmanship is today because we don't see any of it anymore. When we look at what we see going on today in Washington and in many of the state capitals, we know what statesmanship is because we know what we're not seeing. These guys were statesmen. And so it dawned on me that, or it occurred to me that what we need more than anything else is to get back to statesmanship in our state capitals, but especially in Washington. A statesman needs to go, your representative needs to go up there and represent your district to the best of his or her ability. But and so does mine from down here in Georgia. But there are times when your person and my person needs to say, well, I'll give up a little bit on what Georgia wants or Wisconsin wants, because the greater good of the whole nation demands that we get together and we compromise. And so we need far more statesmen and stateswomen in Congress, in our White House, and in the states. And if we could just get a few things done which would create more of those kind of people going, to the point where we could get the balance in the House of Representatives or in the Senate such that the majority of the people were statesmen before they were a Democrat or a Republican or anything else, we would be so far ahead in this country. Now, there's another thing we're going to need as well, and that is we've got to, if you look at the founders, they also knew that they had just created a 14th government, but that 14th government was not created to lord it over and master the other 13. It was created to work with, to mesh with, and only in the case of a war to become the dominant force. And they thought that that government, compared to the 13 and today the 50, was going to stay very small. They thought that government would never, ever outgrow, in any sense, the states and the state governments. If you read the American Federalist Papers, if they didn't think it, they certainly hoped it. And they certainly argued that that was going to be the case. So we're going to need to downsize D.C. as well. That's going to be my third book. And I'm about halfway through it now. But getting back to this second book, we need more statesmen and stateswomen representing us, because what they created in that 14th government was what we call a representative republic. They didn't create a democracy. They didn't want a democracy. They wanted something that had all of the best traits of a democracy, but did not have the things that ultimately history has shown us caused democracies throughout the world to implode in on themselves. And they wanted to stay away from those features of a democracy and pick up the best ones they could. So they came up with what they called a representative republic. I think it actually started over in Scotland with people like Adam Smith and such, but that's what they came up with. And we need to get back today to where we have people in Congress representing us, whether they be in the Senate or the House, who are much more statesmanlike. How do we get there? Well, there's several ways we can get there. We need to begin to curtail the power they currently have to do anything they want to do. Virtually anything they want to do. And then what's worse is not only do they do anything they want to do, but then they exempt themselves from having to abide by it. But we need to curtail those powers without actually keeping them from doing what they're sent up there to do. And there's several ways we can do it. We can work on limits to the kinds of enactments that they can make. When they pass a law, why should that law not automatically include, several years down the road, a sunset? Why should a law just go on and on and on and accumulate more additions, more amendments, more changes, but never go away? We can limit their enactments with things like sunsets. We can limit their laws and their regulations in other ways. If they are passing a bill that it has the title the Highway Act of 2013, why should they be allowed to put a museum in that law for a certain state? You know, the only reason that museum's in there today is because some senator or some representative said, I'll vote for your bill on the highways if you'll include my museum. Or worse yet, they said, I won't vote for your highway bill unless you include my museum.
Well, I mean,
we need to come up with ways to disallow legislators, presidents, regulatory people from putting out something that's got a title that says highway bill and then throwing all kinds of other things into it. And we never know it because we look at it and it says highway bill and we say, well, that's not where I go look for museums and stuff like that.
Well, it's funny that you say that because even with the shutdown that we just experienced, you know, there was so much. I mean, there's two parts to that bill. Number one, that a lot of Americans don't know is it didn't put a spending limit, and the GAO just came out and said that the government just this month alone has spent well over $450 billion. So they didn't put a limit on the spending, but more disturbing. It's all disturbing, but more disturbing is the fact that they added so much pork to that. There was special funding. There was, it was just unbelievable. Harry Reid, I think he put in something like $20 million in what, the GAO, well, not GAO, but other organizations would call just pork funding for pork projects. And I agree with you. This ability for Congress to put other things in a bill other than the name of the bill is just outrageous. To me, it's almost it's bait and switch. It is bait and switch. There's no doubt about it.
Jeff, I can barely hear you.
So yeah, I apologize for that. We are working on the backup server, so the quality is
I understand.
Not that good. But no, what I was talking about is, I use the example that what Harry Reid did on the bill that just passed, to end the shutdown, the government shutdown, and how he put his his own little pork projects into that bill as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens all the time.
So did the one from Kentucky with the job down on the lakes in Kentucky there.
Yep.
Let me give you another example that I think a lot of people will say this is crazy, but why should a regulatory agency be able to come up with regulations that just fly in the face of what Congress has passed legitimately or can't agree on? And why should a state not be able to say, well, within my state, we're not going to pay that much attention to the regulatory rule? Why could we not have a situation where an EPA regulation or a Labor Department regulation or something of that sort would have no binding requirement on a company that operates, say, totally within Wisconsin, or totally within Georgia, or totally within Texas, or what have you. Now, if the regulation is a good one, and it's a mine owner, and they violate some safety acts, and they get hauled into court, then the regulation ought to be part of the court proceedings. Why didn't you follow it? But why can we allow bureaucrats, entrenched bureaucrats, to take the very burdensome excess of laws that Congress puts on us and then just add to them and add to them and add to them? One of the things I talk about in both the books is we frequently today blame a lot of our problem with politicians on lobbyists, and clearly they exercise influence that's way beyond what it should be, I think. But there's another group of people that we don't talk about very much, and I think we ought to start talking about a whole lot more, and that is all these entrenched bureaucrats who work for the government for years, and they foist out on us all kinds of rules and regulations that they think is a good idea, or maybe they've got a financial stake in it or something like that, if at the worst. But and we've seen it here of late. We see Department of Justice lawyers who have been around long enough that now, regardless of what the Constitution says, they're going to wiretap journalists and even the journalists' parents just to listen in and see if there's some reason that they ought to go after that journalist. We've got IRS agents like the one we've heard about so much lately that has had a hand in just tons of things that have taken away liberties from citizens and that sort of thing. So why should regulatory activism of that sort of thing be allowed to go on? There are some other things we can do. We can also do things to the congressmen, the presidents, the cabinet secretaries, and even judges. As long as we don't hurt their bodies, we can limit them in the number of terms they can serve. We can subject them to votes of confidence. One of the things I propose in shortening our leash on politicians is that we change a representative's term to 4 years. But at the end of 2 years, that representative should stand up for a vote of confidence within his or her district. So your representative up there in Wisconsin or mine down here in Georgia may not have an opposition at that second year, but they've got to pass a vote of confidence in order to keep serving the rest of their term. I should not be able to sign a petition to subject your representative up in Wisconsin to that sort of thing, and you should not be able to sign a petition to do that to my representative down here, unless your representative or my representative happens to be what we call leadership in Congress. Why do we let Congress elect certain people to be leaders, and then they do things that really hurt this country? And the citizens know it, and even though they're abiding by the rules that the Senate has for itself or the House has for itself, why can't we as a nation say, we don't want that person to be the Senate leader or the House Speaker anymore? We can't. I shouldn't be able to throw your congressman out of his office or her office, but I should be able to have a voice that says, I don't think they ought to be a leader, and Congress go get another one. And the same thing for you, and if my congressperson were what we call leadership.
I think
so we can do things in the way of term limits.
Sure. Well, let's go.
I particularly think
Robert,
we should.
Robert, I want to go back to your comment about leadership, but I want to make it clear to our listeners and stuff, because I've actually done a lot of research on this. It's not, when you have the minority whip or the House Speaker and all of that, they of recent have a huge authority. You saw that. I mean, the GOP actually changed parliamentary procedures right before the shutdown, and for that, shame on them. It was the way the parliament, the procedures were. That's what I don't like. It's not the matter that they have people that are in position of power or a position of influence, but the problem is now they are using their majority to change the parliamentary procedures to game the system. And a good example of that is Boner passed a rule that's saying that only he or a designate of his office can bring a vote on the majority to the floor. And he changed that like right before they did the shutdown, where prior to, if there was a stalemate, kind of like what we had in the battle budget, the way that the parliamentary procedures were, after a certain period of time that a stalemate was kind of observed, then any member of the opposing party can bring, or not any member, but any member of the party could bring a vote to the floor. So what, the problem that I have is I don't care about it, because we would be voting forever. I mean, can you imagine locking government up because they're voting on these positions? I don't mind them having their leaders, but what I do have an issue with is the fact that they are allowed to change parliamentary procedures without a vote, because in essence they are changing the law. By changing the procedures, they're changing the way that the law operates or the Congress operates. And I have an issue.
Well, they're certainly affecting the way the laws end up coming out of Congress. I think the founders fully intended that both houses would set up their own rules, their own version, for example, of Robert's Rules of Order. But where I'm coming at it from is, if they're following those rules, but they're using them to disadvantage the country, and enough of the voters nationwide think so, then I think we ought to have votes of confidence on the leaders. Now, we shouldn't kick the leaders out of Congress. That's the role of their district or their state. But we could say to Congress, we don't think that person ought to continue to be a leader. That sort of thing.
Gotcha.
Let me mention another one. What if we change some limits on lame duck abuses? What if we gave the House, which is the people's voice, the Senate, remember, is the state's voice. The House is the people's voice. At least that's the way the founders had it set up. What if we gave the House 2 weeks at the beginning of new term in which they could negate a presidential pardon that was a bad one? Or they could negate, with enough votes, a midnight passage of a law by Congress, by a lame duck Congress, which, by the way, is pretty much the way the Affordable Care Act was passed.
Yes.
I think it was passed
December 23rd.
Just before New Year's, and pretty nearly at midnight or something like that. What if we gave the House 2 weeks to negate those kinds of things? Because we do have an awful lot of things that occur during lame duck periods that we usually express a lot of regret about later on.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
And I want to add, I said December 23rd. That was actually the Federal Reserve Act was actually enacted in that created the Federal Reserve December 23rd. But you're right. The
I think
Obama,
you're right.
Yeah, the Obamacare was passed, along the same lines, right during the holiday, and it was not, and it was passed along party lines. Let's make that perfectly clear. There was no bipartisan voting on that. I mean, it was a straight party line vote, and that's the problem that I have, is the way that the certain news organizations and certain politicians will say, well, we passed this with bipartisan, and that is not the case. Not at all. It was strictly a party line vote. It was basically, they had both the House and the Senate and also the executive branch, and they rammed it through.
Yes.
And now we're living.
And sometimes the country, the nation, will change those parties at election time. So if that were to be the case, then I think very often a new term for a very limited period of time, that new party that the nation just elected should have the opportunity to undo some of the lame duck things that were done.
Well, I mean,
that probably shouldn't have been done, or at least in the eyes of the people.
Well, in Obamacare, that's exactly what happened. Is that the
sure?
I mean, they lost. Obviously they lost the House. They still retained majority in the Senate, but they lost seats in the Senate as well. I mean, and that is the thing. Correct. Is that those, a lot of the Tea Partiers and Cruzes and Rand Pauls, they were sent by their constituents. Exactly that. When they were saying, and that's the thing that aggravated me. And regardless of what side of the argument you're on, I'm on. I think it's pretty clear what side of the argument I'm on. But if you just look at the fact of the matter, what upsets me more is when you hear the media, basically distort the truth, and that's the reason why I don't listen to the mainstream media anymore, because they're saying, well, this was voted, these people, the president won his election on Obamacare. Well, we're finding out the president won his election basically on a lie, because if he would have went up there and told everybody that, well, you can't have your doctor, 20 million of you is instantly going to have to go out and find insurance. There is no more business corporation mandate. We are finding out now that the immigrants that they're going to give amnesty to don't have to or can't participate in the Obamacare. And everybody's like, well, that's good. It's like, no, actually it's not, because what you're going to do is when corporations do have to provide health care, under the Affordable Care Act next year, who do you think they're going to hire? The people that they don't have to provide health care for, or the people that already got it. But either way, they don't have to provide health care for them. So, I think if the American people, and it's coming out, and even the really supportive left wingers, I was listening to fairly well-known comic the other night, and he just went after Wasserman Schultz and said the president lied. I don't care what you call it. He lied to the American people. And this guy, in his eyes, the president couldn't do no wrong. And like I said, but in the midterm, they did take back the House with a mandate of clean up Obamacare. And it irates me when I hear politicians say,
if you consider the House to be the voice of the people, which is what the founders intended, then that would be the place to give, at least in effect, a veto. Now, it doesn't mean they couldn't start over again and that sort of thing, but how many times do we see an administration going out as a lame duck and throwing so many regulations that they couldn't get passed through Congress in an executive order, and then the new Congress people and maybe the new administration spend the first half of the first term literally undoing all those things instead of getting on with the country's business.
Exactly.
Let me try one other one on you.
Sure.
what if one of the 4 planes on 9/11 had targeted the Capitol building and managed to wipe out the House of Representatives? I think we need to come up with a way to improve the survivability of the House of Representatives. If I understand today's situations, if the president gets taken out, we've got a vice president to step in immediately. And we've even got people down the line from that. If the Senate were to be taken out, the governors could appoint new senators almost immediately.
Yes.
So we would be without a Senate for a very short while. But if the House were taken out, how long do you think it would take us to replace the House?
Yes, you would have to you would have to have a special election. Now, I don't know under terms now. And this is the whole argument of the presidential powers and martial law and all of that. Could he institute a law and then basically say that we can put together a House of Representatives, the states and I think it's critical too. Going back to your earlier statement about the House representing the people, a lot of people don't know because I am finding a lot of people don't read the Constitution. The 17th Amendment, prior to the 17th Amendment, prior to 1788, the House or the Senate was actually elected by the state legislature. They would send the senators up to Congress. Now that all changed with the 17th Amendment. So what we have now under our current government is not what our forefathers envisioned. And that's why,
not.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we have
and
this.
It waters down the purpose of the 2 branches of the Congress.
Yes.
Because in the founders' eyes, you had the positions of the people, the wishes of the people, and that was to be expressed in the House. And that was the one place that we voted, like a democracy.
Yep.
Then you had the positions of the states, and they were particularly concerned about differing positions of the states because there were large states, there were small states, there were economically powerful states, there were weak states, there were manufacturing states, there were agricultural states, and we still have that today. And yet the Senate is not much more than just another smaller version of the House because of the 17th Amendment. The Senate was to represent the states, and it was also to deal mostly with anything that came at us through the international relations dealing, through the State Department in the form of treaties and that sort of thing. But we have changed all that. But my point here is that we could quickly reconstitute a Senate. I don't think we could quickly reconstitute a House. And it scares the living daylights out of me to think what it would have been like after 9/11 for the next 6 or 7 months while we were trying to reconstitute a House, for this nation to be run by a president and a Senate, or a president and a Supreme Court, because the Senate got wiped out, and even there it took a little while to reconstitute it. Or what if half the House had been wiped out? We just would not have, in my mind, a viable government for quite a while, and a lot of scary things could happen. We can change that very easily. When we elect a representative in my district or in your district, why don't we have 2 elections and have another set of candidates running, and they'll become what we call the standby representatives, and they're ready to step in at any moment should something like that happen.
Yeah.
Or in my case, we had a representative several years ago from Augusta, Georgia, but he died, and so our governor put the appointment of a new representative, or excuse me, the selection of a new representative on a fast track. It still took us 4 to 5 months to get a representative. All that time, I had no voice in the House, or at least I felt I did not.
Yeah, actually, I just pulled up the constitutional law, and this actually went into effect in 2005, so this is just a recent change.
Yeah,
the Constitution
probably
calls,
a result of.
Yeah, it says the Constitution calls for vacancy in
But we could easily elect a standby representative in each district. And then if we had a representative who had a health problem, if we had a calamity such as 9/11, or if we had a representative that the people in our district thought couldn't pass the vote of confidence in his second year, we'd have somebody ready to go.
Yeah, actually, I want to read this to you because it's our listener, because I'm actually learning along with our listeners, is that the way the Constitution is written is they have to have an election within 49 days of the vacancy. This is for the House. So there is
within how many days?
49 days. So you have 49 days basically in which you're not represented.
49.
Yep, you're absolutely correct. Now, there is a law that's being proposed by Representative Bard. He wants to do an amendment that basically says upon being sworn in the House or Senate, members would provide a list of 3 designees, one of whom would replace them in the event of their death, incapacitation, or disappearance. So they are trying to make an amendment that would address that issue. But that was in 2000.
But you notice they're going to do it in a way where they control the replacement.
They control it. Yep, you're correct. Yep. Yeah, they control who they want to succeed.
Right.
You know,
we're whether it be gerrymandering districts or whatever, we are dedicated to very much today. Our politicians are dedicated very much today to re-election, or at least replacement from within the party that is in power at the time.
Yep.
Well, Jeff, those are some of the ideas, but I really believe that we have got to, as a nation, as a people, start moving in the direction of constitutional conventions regularly. And I think in particular at this point in our history, we need to do it rather quickly right now. And then maybe if we can get it done and get some good things done, move to a point where we do them pretty regularly. I think the founders wanted us to do those things.
Yep.
I think they fully expected that we would meet frequently and take on the work they did and tweak it and make it better.
Yes. No,
or at least try to.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the problem, you know, with Congress. I know that Senator Rand Paul actually proposed too, is why does Congress actually have to meet at the Capitol? You know, with modern technology, why don't they just meet in their respective states and teleconference? You know, like everybody else does. I mean, he was doing that because of the travel issues, but I mean that's another thing. Is that why does our Congress have to actually meet in the Capitol every time? Why can't they do it? Even when they're in the Capitol, most of them don't vote anyways themselves. They send someone to vote for them. So,
yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly.
No, I mean that was...
in my next book, as I've got it laid out now, and if it comes out finally that way, I would change the rules to where they just don't meet at the Capitol nearly as every week, but they meet far less often, and they are required to spend time, much more time, in the district or in the state, and meet far less frequently as a group.
Yeah.
I think the founders probably wanted them to meet together. So Rand Paul's idea of meeting electronically may or may not be a good idea, but I don't know why they need to meet as much as they do.
Well, what concerns me too is that, I'd like to see, if they don't read the bill, then they shouldn't be, because if I was a CEO of a corporation and an attorney or anybody handed me a document and said, sign this and make it, execute it as part of our business, make it our corporate, put it into our corporate resolution, right? And I do that, and it's detrimental to the corporation or causes the corporation harm. There's this thing called fiduciary responsibility that I can be sued by the shareholders or the other corporate members. I just don't get, the whole thing, we use Obamacare, and, I know we helm that to death, but that law is so flawed from the get-go. When you had Nancy Pelosi getting up there going, well, you're going to have to pass the law before you can see what's in the law. And it's like, well, huh? And then you had, President Barack Obama stand up there and say, you have my promise that we will have open discussions, we will have C-SPAN in there, you'll be able to hear the negotiations and all of that stuff. And then, of course, C-SPAN was not allowed. They were actually barred and from it. And it's just like, you're absolutely right. And the reality of it is I've read not all of the law, but I've read most of the law since it was enacted, and I would still say I've got about another 60% to read still. I mean, a lot of people don't realize 7,200 words or 72,000 words is a lot of words in those books. I mean, it literally takes you a year to read most of it. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
161-page first book is 32,000 words. So
yeah,
that would be 2 of those books.
Yeah. Well, I
just
can
one law.
I can just tell you.
And
yep.
After Congress finished with it, how many pages have since been added on in terms of regulations?
11
the president's edict to make changes to the law.
11.
Or what have you?
I'll tell you. There's 11.5 million words. The law, the regulations is 30 times greater than the law. 30 times greater than the law. So, I can tell you, I've read the Bible 2 times. Read the Bible 2 times, just doing, normal reading on a normal, Bible study thing. And I've read the Holy Bible twice already to my 60% of the ACA law. It's just unbelievable. It's just I don't know. It's crazy. So, but I really, and I don't care. I've read the other book, and to be honest with you, I like your book. And I'm not saying that because you're my guest. I'm sorry,
I couldn't quite catch what you said.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that I've actually read Mark Levine's book as well as your book.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I've read both books, and both books are, and I'm not saying that because you're my guest. I mean, I would tell you but I enjoyed it. I mean, I read it. I will tell you, Mark Levine's book I actually got on audio versus reading it, and I haven't completed it all. It puts me to sleep before I can finish.
Well,
finish a chapter.
I've read enough and heard enough of his talks and such that I think he and I are very much on the same page. We may have differences in a few places, but the central theme, I think both of us would agree on very much, is that we're not going to change anything by going through Congress or our elected officials. We're only going to change it if we do it like the founders did in 1776, and that's do it on our own.
Yeah, no, we definitely got to have a Article 5 constitutional convention, and we've got to force the issue. And a lot of people just
Article 5 includes both ways, but the one we're talking about is the way that's never been done before.
Yes.
And that is for the people themselves to do it.
Yeah, by the states. Yep. And it's trying times right now. I mean, we've got, I would estimate, and I'm not one to fearmonger or whatever, but I'm listening to the experts, to the economists, to the people that are in the money system, and they're saying that we have about 3 to 5 more years. This republic, well, it's not a republic now, it's far from it, but this form of government cannot sustain itself. Its current spend, like I said, Barack Obama has already double or will double by February the budget. They've already said that it went from 10 million when he went into office. When he leaves office, it's going to be near 22 to 25. Trillion. It was 10 trillion when he came in. When he leaves, it's going to be anywhere from 22 to 25 trillion dollars. We just can't. And all the economists are just saying we just can't continue down this path. A lot of Americans don't know, China and Japan, who are our number one lenders, are no longer buying our bonds. I mean, they're no longer buying them. The Federal Reserve is buying up all of our debt, and then they're printing, on the legitimate debt market, no one's buying our debt. I mean, it's the Federal Reserve. That's why they're doing the quantitative easing and pumping the money into the money supply, because no one is buying our debt anymore. We can't continue. We cannot continue along this path. And it is refreshing, though, because we do spend quite a bit of time talking about those problems. It is nice to see fellow Americans, fellow patriots, such as yourself, Bob, actually come up with solutions. It's nice to read it and everything. And I highly recommend that everybody, go out to the website, go out to www.themidnightpatriot.com, and you can actually download or you can actually order the book right directly from us through Amazon. We don't mark it up. It's the same price. It's a pass-through. So there's no markup. One thing I will tell you, if you do go on the web, I found this out, Bob, and you probably need to let your publisher know this, or let Amazon know this. If you search for shortening our leash on politicians returning to purpose, it does not come up. So you just have to do
Oh, really?
Yeah, you have to search on shortening our leash on politicians.
It was coming up the last few days. Now, the Kindle version is not yet on on Amazon.
Okay.
But you can download the electronic version of both books.
Sure.
From the publisher's website, which is tatepublishing.com.
Okay, tatepublishing.com.
Right now on Amazon, and I think on Books, Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, only the paperback version. Okay. And there is there's a limited edition of hardbacks that I have.
Sure.
If someone wants one of those, they'd have to get in touch with me. And they can do that through my website, or can I give them my
Absolutely.
Email?
Absolutely. You can give them your email, your website. You can give them anything we can do to get the word out.
Well, if somebody wanted a signed copy, hardback or paperback, they'd have to get that through me, and my personal email is B as in Bob, Savage, SAVAGE, at Hartcom, HARTCOM.net. And I'd be glad to get them a signed copy. They can get the paperback copies through Amazon, and I will check into the shortening our leash. It was on Amazon the other day.
It's on there, but
even if it's not, they can also get it through the publisher, Tate Publishing.com, and they have they have an online store.
You know, it's on there. They just don't have it on there as your full name. They have shortening our leash on politicians.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've
got you.
That will show up, but if you put the full
returning
we'll
work
purpose,
on that.
yeah, no, we'll. And
thank you, sir.
Oh, not a problem. Hey, set two aside for me. You'll be getting an order for me here in the morning and everything.
Well, thank you.
Oh
okay.
No, I definitely want hard copies. I am accumulating. You know, and the thing is books don't last long because my buddies were like, hey, do you have that book or whatever that you were talking about on your show? And they end up going right back into the mail. So what I want to do is keep I want to get 2 hard copies from you, and then I'll of course order.
You.
Yeah, I'll order some paper.
I'll watch for your message and I'll get them to you.
Yep. So once again, everybody, go out to www.themidnightpatriot.com. We will have links when we repost the show after the live show. We will have links out to Bob's website and how you can order that. Orders books. Now, when are you going to be done with your 3rd book? I can't wait. About another.
Well, I'm sort of at a writer's block point right now, but I'm about a third of the way through it, and I believe it's going to be somewhere about the same size as the first 2 books, somewhere in the 150, 160 page range.
Sure.
And my thesis there is the last part of the problem, at least in our current day, is we need to downsize D.C. and return more of the functions to the states. Now, I'm not talking about a states' rights type of thing. I think there are just many, many functions that the founders believed, and I do too, that the states will, every state will take care of education. Every state will take care of criminal law, civil law. But each state will do it a little differently depending upon how the folks in that state feel about things.
Sure.
And I think that's as it should be. So the idea of a federal government giving us one size fits all is just not a good plan.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it works.
All right, sir. Well, hey, thank you for taking time out of your evening. I do apologize for the delay there at the beginning. That's a story.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Not a problem. We'll get the word out and everything. But I appreciate it. And,
thank you, sir.
Not a problem. You take
care.
I'm
going to keep working on these town hall ideas as well.
Let us know. I mean, look, we have a lot of broadcast capabilities here, including video. So if there's anything, and I offer this to you, if there's anything that you need, be it relays, being, video conferencing and stuff, we have those capabilities. Phil, I am offering that to you to help get this word out to fellow patriots.
Well, thank you.
Not a problem.
I will certainly
take me up on it. Take us up on it.
I'll take you up on it.
All right, sir. Because, like I said, we have 3 hours that we do the show. Well, the system sits idle for the other 21 hours. Gotcha. So yeah, there's no reason. If we could fill up programming all day long, I would, and everything. So that's
Thank
about
you, sir.
it. Oh, not a problem. Take care of yourself.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah, I will be talking to you tomorrow, my friend. Thank you.
All right.
So that was wow. What an interview. I have learned, one thing that I love about doing what we do here at the Midnight Patriot is the fact that I get to meet so many fellow patriots. Robert Savage, both of his books, I highly recommend. And we didn't even get into his, we talked briefly about his 5013C organizations, and it all kind of ties in what he's doing with the books. But we'll probably get back, and I do apologize to all of our listeners. I'm going to, kind of bring you up to speed here in a minute and stuff. But I do recommend, after we do the show tonight, we will post of course the recording of the show for download. Inside there, we will actually have links to both of his books, to Robert Savage's books, and that we talked about tonight, and also his website. So I highly recommend that you go out and get it. And look, we get a lot of requests from authors to be on this show, and I kind of have just a policy. I have to read your book first. And I will tell you that 30% don't even make it to the show. We're a young show, and and I get a lot of criticism from the powers that be. But look, I'm not going to. One thing you're going to learn about me: I'm not going to endorse a product, or I'm not going to endorse a service just so I can make money. And the reason why we set up the Amazon store, the affiliate store, is that we don't make. That's a pass-through. It was easy for us to be able to use their service in order to list, so that we're not spending time having to constantly update our site with new books and new products and new services. So we use the Amazon site. So you can go to our website, www.themidnightpatriot.com, hit the products page, and it will tell you that it's going to take you off link. So you click on that, and that will bring up the Amazon store. Everything on that store are things that I would recommend that you have, be it prepper, be it book, be it videos. These are videos, documentaries that I personally watched and that I've researched and everything, and that I endorse. Like I said, we don't make, full disclosure. I think Amazon pays us 3% of the sale price or whatever. So it's not like, like other talk shows and stuff who I'm actually getting a cut of the sale. I am, we get a cut, but that's not our revenue stream. You're not going to hear us push products. If there's a product, except for our advertisers, just go out to our products page, and that's what I recommend. Be it prepper, be it food, storable food, be it books, be it videos, and things of that nature. So, like I said, everything that's out there, I promise you, I've read myself, and that's why I'm making the recommendation. We had a crazy night there for our listeners. We are actually running off of our. And I do apologize for the audio quality tonight. We are running off our backup server. I want to give you guys, we're going to do some more research, but I've been talking back and forth actually during the show with our network people. So for those that don't know, we are a fully functioning studio here. We have ISDN line that we put in the other day so we can actually hook up to other studios, which actually raises a great point, a good word announcement. We are now officially on Stitcher. So if you use a Stitcher device or a Stitcher player or whatever, you can actually get the Midnight Patriot on Stitcher. And we are adding multiple sites that you can reach us. We're still working with iHeartRadio, and we'll see how that goes. They're still kind of pending us as far as status goes, but we're getting there. And the best way that I can tell you, if you want to support our efforts here, if you're a small business owner, and I've said this time and time again, we have the lowest rates. We get over 2,000 listeners to our podcasts on a daily basis that download our podcast between all of the different services that we broadcast out to over the internet, streaming and such. So if you're a small business and you want to sell your product, if you advertise with us, our advertisement is anywhere from $6 to $10 a month. That equates to 60,000 listeners right now with our current numbers. It's not even including the website. We don't even throw that in there. Most of the people come to our website because of the podcast and to listen to those. We don't put extra news up there except just what's on our podcast. So, if you look at 60,000 listeners a month for $10 to $6 a month. Now the price is not going to stay there forever. As we go mainstream, as we get up to about 19 to 20,000 listeners, obviously, supply and demand is going to kick in here and stuff. But we have slots for about 40 advertisements is what we're looking at. So if you're a small business and you want to, if you have a product that you want to market to the Patriot community, give us a call or, email me, Jeff at Norton, at themidnightpatriot.com. It is Jeff at themidnightpatriot.com. You can also email me at advertising at themidnightpatriot.com. That's the other way to get in touch with us. But the best way is come to me directly. We don't have a huge advertising staff. I'll work with you. If you don't have an ad, I will create one for you. if you don't have a script or copy for the podcast, because with every ad you get, you also guarantee to get a 30-second, if not a 1-minute clip based upon your product and how we can market that. So you get that, and that goes out as well with every podcast. So, this is a great opportunity for you to get on the ground floor of a great thing. We are by far one of the faster growing podcasts out there as far as marketability. And I owe that all to you guys. Obviously, we're doing something right. We are working with a professional producer of radio shows and everything like that. We are going to get better. We want a quality product, and that's why I'm working with these producers to kind of help us on the technical aspects, so I can focus on bringing you the quality of the guests, such as we did with Robert and many of our other guests, Joe the plumber. I don't want to go down the list because it feels like a Oscar acceptance speech. I don't want to offend anybody for leaving them off, but I can tell you, we have outstanding guests here. Now this week is going to be a pretty guest-filled week. Tomorrow we're going to have Stone Anthony. He's running for president. We're going to have another gentleman on in the evening. He's running for a political office down in Illinois. That's tomorrow. Obviously we're going to be talking about various things. I think tomorrow's going to be heavily on the job market. Now I will tell you, if you have Netflix, I would prepare by going to Death by China. It's I think Stone put it out there. We'll also put it out there. Watch that, because we're going to be talking about that movie quite a bit. Then on Wednesday, we are going to have another author. Excellent book. I just finished that up last week, and we'll post that on there. Muti, M-U-T-I. And we'll get him. He's going to be here Wednesday, but go out to the web, follow us on the web, and we'll get that updated, and you'll see his books, or his book. Excellent book. It's kind of a inspirational kind of vignettes. It's not like a full long story. It's little stories, many posts, many different articles that he's written for newspapers, and he is a published columnist and stuff. So he's going to be on the show. We're also a lawyer. He's not only a lawyer but former mayor. This guy's incredible. His background. So we're gonna took on the unions, the educational unions. So we're going to be talking about that. But I highly recommend. We'll post that up on the site here in the next day or so, and get you guys invited. So with that, we talk about you never want to become the news story, right? We had a lot of things to talk about, but that kind of got eaten up. Let me tell you guys what happened at the very beginning. We were hooked into the network. Literally, everything was fine. We were connected. Everything was fine. I always run a test before the show, and no problem. The minute I went to run the show, we literally could not connect. We could not connect to Spreaker. So, running around here trying to figure out rebooting, routers, all that stuff. Now, we have a dedicated line that comes in here to the Midnight Patriot. So it's not like a DSL or anything like that, or cable. It's a dedicated line that's provided to us. It's a high-speed internet line for broadcasting. And apparently, after talking with tech support and doing, what they call trace routes and using a product called Wireshark, you got to remember, we do come from a technology background in this industry. So we ran Wireshark, and we were seeing our ports right at 9 o'clock, right as we were to go live, our ports were being blocked. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Now ports, you call an IP and then you connect through a port, and that's how the system knows it's you. And so, the ports on our routers were actually being blocked. So we're going to do some investigation, obviously, tomorrow and figure out what happened there. But the only way that the ports could be being blocked is, something or someone blocked those ports. So we're going to look. And it was on our router. So we got to look at our router. Now, obviously, we're pretty, how do you say? We're pretty, on the fringe out there in some of our topics and some of our criticisms of our government. And, it's not far stretch. I mean, we deal on a daily basis. We deal with attacks on our website. I mean, but that's just part of the business. I mean, we have the ability to actually, how do you say, block those and stuff. We do it on a daily basis through IP protocols and IP chains and different things. Not getting too technical with you guys, but we'll get a response. We'll find out. So it knocked us off air for 30 minutes. So we had to actually go back on our backup system. And so that's what we're running off of right now. And I do apologize. We're running actually off a DSL line backup. So I do apologize for that. But we'll get an answer and we'll get it out to you. So I appreciate it. May God bless you guys. Thanks for listening to the Midnight Patriot. We'll be back tomorrow with Stone Anthony for 2006 president. And then we're also going to be back with another special guest later on in the evening. Join us on the web at www.themidnightpatriot.com. Like us on Facebook. Follow us. Get the word out. Get the word out. How do we affect change? By one patriot at a time. Good night and God bless you.